Well, we're absolutely excited and honored to have the legendary commodity trader and portfolio manager Jim Rogers with us today from Singapore. And Jim was one of the founding fathers of the Quantum Fund. And between the years of 1973 to 1980, the fund is reported to have gained 4,200%, whilst the S&P 500 index was up 47%. Quite an achievement. Jim also in 1998 founded the Rogers International Commodity Index, which is a benchmark that we all use today. And he's also the author of several books, including Investment Biker and Adventure Capitalist. Jim's views are highly sought after, and we're very honored to have you here. So welcome, Jim. Thank you for accommodating us. And particularly with our work with cycles, the question that everybody's asking, be it at the foundation or at Market Timing Report, do you use cycles as part of your decision-making process?
Well, certainly not formally, I don't. I certainly am sometimes aware of cycles, but I do not make investment decisions based on cycles, if that's your question. If there's a cycle to know about, I want to know about it. Yes, definitely. I mean, okay. Silver, for instance, has had ups and downs, and I need to know about those ups and downs for anything.
Right. So you've been incredibly prescient in your views and forecasts across a whole range of commodities, currencies, and of course, most financial instruments. So if you're not using cycles, what do you put this down to? What factors do you consider, and how do you see these things coming up?
Well, Andy, first of all, I make plenty of mistakes. Don't think I don't. I wish there were a way to avoid mistakes. That would be great. Whatever success I have had, it's from finding things that are cheap and ignored where there's a change taking place. And if there's a serious change, I hope I'm smart enough to figure it out, and I'm smart enough to buy it. But the beauty of that kind of investing is you can own it a very long time. And I'm lazy. Selling takes work. So if I can find something that I can own for a long time, it makes my life simpler.
What do you consider a long time then? What sort of time periods are we looking at?
Well, the best would be the rest of my life. Then I don't ever have to sell it. My lawyer will sell it someday. No, I'm just as long as possible. And nothing goes on forever, as you well know. But I like to find things that I can own for a long time, whether it's a year or a decade.
Fabulous. Thank you. So I first met you back in 2008, and you'd literally just moved to Singapore. I think you came across, we met in Miami. And I remember you telling us that you wanted your daughters to be fluent in Mandarin. You've always been very bullish on China. In fact, I think you were probably one of the first people to really speak out about this. What are your latest thoughts about China, the nation, both economically and geopolitically?
Well, first of all, China is the only country in history that's had recurring periods of greatness. Great Britain was great once, Rome was great once, Egypt was great once. But China, for whatever reason, has been on top 3 or 4 times in history. It's collapsed 3 or 4 times in history, but it's the only country that, for whatever reason, after being at the bottom for a few years, turns around and rises to the top again. And from what I can figure out, that's happening again. It's going to be extremely important in the 21st century. It already is, as we all know now. People laughed back in those days and said, no, Japan, Japan, Japan. Well, I figured it was going to be China. I still have that view. I wanted my children to know Asia and to speak Mandarin. So I was preparing them for the 21st century, I hope.
Great.
Now, that does not mean that you can rush out and buy Chinese shares every day. No, 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 no. America had many bear markets and problems along the way, but it became a very successful country. And if you bought shares at the right time, you made a lot of money.
And how do you see the geopolitical significance of China at the moment?
Well, they are the largest country, or certainly one of. They and India both claim to be the largest. So in that sense, they are very important. Their economy is certainly one of the strongest in the world, one of the largest in the world. And that has a huge significance. When you have a very large economy and a very large population, people pay attention to you. I think China is the largest trading country, or partner with many, many countries in the world. So that means that people listen to them or want to know what they're thinking or doing. They will certainly have declines. They will certainly have problems, just as the U.S. did. But I'm living in Asia because of China, and I want my children to speak Mandarin because of China.
Right. Now, one of the things is that China has got a very strong grasp on the rare earths, which are critical, really, as we evolve in things like the electrical vehicle market and so on. How do you see this impacting the rest of the world? Can you see China creating a monopoly in this area? And what would therefore there be the consequences for the rest of the Western world?
Well, you have said it. They do have the control of the supply of these things which we need, which we being the world. I'm sure, I hope the world will find other sources eventually, but at the moment, China has the supply. And China, if it ever comes to it, they can put the squeeze on a lot of people. I hope that they continue to trade and sell the stuff. I hope we all continue to trade and sell our products.
I mean, can you see a time where China might create a more monopoly-like situation and just hang on to this stuff? Or do you think that's not likely to happen?
Well, I don't think it's likely to happen anytime soon, but yes, of course it can happen. If there's war or something, we, the U.S., are going to cut off a lot of things. Everybody's going to cut off a lot of things. I hope there's no war. But no, I don't see that. I mean, China wants to sell the stuff. It wants to make money. Everybody does. But unless something serious happens, I suspect that they will continue to sell to the rest of the world.
Thank you. So, just looking back at your career, you've not only lived through these and very successfully harnessed the superinflationary time period from 1970 to 1975, which is probably a golden opportunity. How has this impacted your mindset towards trading and investing ever since? And do you think we're approaching this time, this sort of scenario again?
Well, first of all, I know it's not easy. I know it takes a lot of work. Fortunately, I loved what I was doing, still do, but especially in those days. So it takes work, and there are opportunities if you will look for them, not just in stocks, but bonds, countries, currencies, commodities. There are opportunities in everything if one is diligent.
Okay. And well, where do you see inflation heading right now?
Well, throughout history, when someone prints a lot of money, it has always led to inflation. And we have certainly printed a huge amount of money. Again, as you know, not just we, the U.S., but Japan and many other countries as well. So inflation is back. I'm afraid it's going to get worse because so much money has been printed. You know, we had it in the 70s, but in the 70s, the U.S. was a creditor nation. Now the U.S. is the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. So I would suspect that the inflation is going to be much worse before this is over. I don't really like it, but I know that the world has done this before. And whenever politicians print a lot of money, somebody has to pay.
And then, well, what are your present views on the United States, both economically and geopolitically?
Well, the U.S. is the largest economy, and it has printed a huge amount of money. It's the largest debtor in world history, and that's going to present problems. 100 years ago, Britain was the number one country in the world. There was no number two. But, Andy, 50 years later, Britain went bankrupt and had to be bailed out by the IMF. When I say bankrupt, I mean literally they couldn't pay their bills. And the IMF flew to London and saved them. So this sort of thing has happened before. It's happening to the U.S. It's not a good time to be a young American. It's a good time to be an old American. I don't have to pay for all this. but my children are going to have a big problem sometime in their lifetime because of this staggering amount of debt that has been built up in the U.S.
Absolutely. And what do you see the geopolitical position as America? Do you see it maintain its policeman of the world situation, a superpower, or do you think this could be usurped not just by China, but other nations?
Well, no country stayed on top forever. Rome was great once, Egypt was great once, Britain was great once, but they all lost their position. So it's going to happen to the U.S., whether we like it or not. As I said, we're now the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. That has always led to problems for countries. So the U.S. is going to lose its position. If you study history, it's not going to lose it this year, but it's going to lose it because we built up so much debt. And unfortunately, we're making enemies with our currency and many other things. So don't particularly like saying it, but certainly the U.S. will not be on top 100 years from now.
Sure that. Yeah. What commodities do you think are worth backing at the moment, and which ones do you see maybe as potential shorts? As anything in particular on your radar, or even currencies?
I don't see any shorts in the commodities market. There probably are some. I'm just too lazy to know. Agriculture is very depressed. And I mean, the average age of farmers in America is nearly 60 years old. The average age of farmers in Japan is over 60. So the world's got problems coming in agriculture, whether we like it or not. But of course, problems also are opportunities. So if one can figure out which agricultural products are the cheapest, one's going to make a lot of money. But that's probably true of silver too, and other things. Copper, the energy of electric automobiles use several times more copper than gasoline automobiles. So there are going to be many opportunities as the world changes.
And do you still see gold then as the potential sort of safe haven, or do you think that's moving more to silver, or that is silver more an industrial commodity that would be in demand?
I don't particularly like to use the word safe when I talk about investments. There are not many safe investments that I've ever come across. But silver is much cheaper than gold on a historic basis. Gold is near its all-time high. Silver is over 50% below its all-time. So if I were buying, and I own both, if I were buying one today, I would prefer to buy silver, but I will buy more of both before this is over. For thousands of years, they have been places that people turn to when they get worried, And I'm an old peasant. Us peasants keep some silver in the closet. We have some gold under the bed. We know that we're going to need it someday. Eventually.
Right. And how do you see the role of cryptocurrencies unfolding from this point in time? We've seen a boom and bust already. Where do you see them heading next? Is there a place for them to continue? Do they have any intrinsic value?
Well, I don't see any intrinsic value, but they are trading vehicles for a lot of people. Some have already gone to zero, as you know, and disappeared, but Bitcoin and some of the others are active trading vehicles. And if you're a good trader, and I'm not, so I don't trade them, but if you are a good trader, you might make a lot of money trading some of the cryptocurrencies. Now, the bulls, of course, say that they're going to be money. In my view, that is not going to happen because it's and by the way, most countries in the world now are working on computer money, call it whatever we want to, because they want computer money. It's much more efficient. It's cheaper. They don't have to print it or transport it or guard it or anything else. But I don't see that the U.S., not Washington, is never going to say, okay, guys, this is money now. But if you want to use that money, you can use that money too. That's not the way Washington thinks. That's not the way politicians think. They want control. They want their monopoly. And they certainly want all the money on the computer because then they'll know everything we do. I'm not particularly fond of that, but I'm just telling you, they love it. And they're going to do as much as they can to control all of us and our money.
Sure. And then historically, commodities have been dollar denominated and traded in US dollars. We're starting to see things like oil move, Shanghai, for example, backed by the BRICS nations, etc., to some extent. How big a threat do you see this move away from dollar denominated currencies?
Well, I know it's going to happen. It's always happened, as I said before. Once upon a time, it was the British pound. Once upon a time, it was the French franc. Once upon a time, it was a lot of things. And the U.S. is now the largest debtor in the world, and it's getting worse, which fundamentally, of course, makes some people wonder about the dollar, but also the dollar's politicizing the currency. If they get angry at you, they say, Andy, you cannot use dollars anymore, or they just take them away from you. So many people, even our friends, are starting to say, wait a minute. That's not the way this is supposed to work. Currency is supposed to be neutral. Well, I'm afraid Washington is driving people to look for competitors, and with their both political and economic policies, they're making more and more people try to find a competitor. It's not here yet. Don't worry. Don't throw your dollars out the window yet, but there may come a time, certainly in my lifetime and certainly in my children's lifetime.
Right. So, well, thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us? Any other views you have on anything that would be of interest to all our followers?
One last point on that last point. In the 1920s, it was the pound sterling that was the world's currency. And then Britain got deeply in debt, went bankrupt, and people moved away from the pound sterling. And I don't like it, Andy, but as I read history, everybody who has been on top with their currency at one time or another has lost that position. So it's going to happen to the U.S. And if we think it's not, we should read more history.
Absolutely. So it sounds like subconsciously you're using a lot of cycles here, because that's exactly what we like to look at, the rise and fall of empires and nations and so on, as well as in the market. So
in that sense, if that's when you mean cycles, yes, of course, history is full of cycles. And whether it's wheat or countries or currencies, they happen, and we all should know about them.
Absolutely. And we really appreciate you providing the time to talk to us. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Andy. It's been fun. Let's do it again sometime.
We would love to. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And be careful of the dollar.
Yeah.